Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Six Bridges Book Festival. I'm Jajuan Johnson, and we're glad you have joined us today. You're in for a real treat today. But before I introduce you to our authors, let's get a few housekeeping items out of the way. If you'd like to ask a question, and we really invite you to do so, you can use the chat box, type it there. I'll make sure that I pay attention to the box and ask your questions for our guest. Also, we want to really just invite you to really think about this conversation that we're about to have. We invite you to also buy the books. They're being used on the campus, CAL's campus, where you can do so. And I also believe we're going to have some virtual links. Now, so also onto the main show. I'm honored to present our authors whose books really speak to the truths they've witnessed and experienced, covering the themes of race, gender, sexuality, and class, and the inequities tied to these dynamics. First, we have Darrin Bell, who is a recipient of the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning, the 2016 Berryman Award for editorial cartooning, the 2015 RFK Award for editorial cartooning, and UC Berkeley's 2015 Daily Californian Alumni of the Year Award. Quite an accomplished writer here who has served as the Daily Californian's staff cartoonist. He began freelancing for the opinion pages of the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and the Oakland Tribune. In 1997, he co-created the comic strip Rudy Park and self-syndicated it to technology magazines. Our second guest we have is Élodie Durand, who is an artist and illustrator for both children and adults, and who has been working for over 15 years. She has graduated from the School of Decorative Arts of Strasbourg and the University of Paris. After debuting with an international award-winning graphic memoir, parentheses, she has drawn the children's series Les Grandes Années, among other projects. In 2021, Top Shelf published parentheses and her English language debut, which won an inaugural Graphic Medicine Award and was named one of the American Library Association's best graphic novels for adults. Today, we're going to discuss their groundbreaking works with Darrin Bell's The Talk and Élodie's Transitions, A Mother's Journey. And we're going to start with author Darrin Bell. And we're going to start with a video first for you just to kind of get some insight in terms of this book before we move to our questions. Again, thank you for joining us. And as we move to this conversation, please enter your questions into the chat.
Darrin Bell was 6 years old when his mother told him he couldn't have a realistic water gun. She said she feared for his safety, that police tend to think of little black boys as older and less innocent than they really are. Through evocative illustrations and sharp humor, Bell examines how the talk shaped intimate and public moments from childhood to adulthood. While coming of age in Los Angeles and finding a voice through cartooning, Bell becomes painfully aware of being regarded as dangerous by white teachers, neighbors, and police officers, and thus of his mortality. Drawing attention to the brutal murders of African Americans and showcasing revealing insights and cartoons along the way, he brings us up to the moment of reckoning when people took to the streets protesting the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And now Bell must decide whether he and his own 6-year-old son are ready to have the talk. NPR says, the book is visually stunning and propulsive with an absorbing narrative voice. Divided into almost 24 chapters, its drawings fluctuate from the whimsically cartoonish to the delightfully painterly. Reminiscent of long-form comics memoirs such as Alison Bechdel's Fun Home and Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, stories about young writers and artists finding their ways through both personal and structural hardships and strife, This epic portrait of an artist is a masterpiece. Like the effects of an unduly perceptive editorial cartoon, the talk makes a penetrative and lasting impression. So naturally, it's been banned in Florida.
Darrin, thank you for that powerful video imagery. It resonates so deeply, particularly with me as a Black man, understanding the talk. For our guests who are joining us today, can you tell us about what inspired this book and summarize in terms of what is the talk?
Well, this actually wasn't the book that I sold to the publisher. I sold a graphic memoir about my time as my grandfather's caretaker toward the end of his life. But then George Floyd was killed, and Breonna Taylor, and the nation and then the whole world erupted in protest. And my publisher called me and said, maybe we should put that book on the back burner and do something that speaks to this moment. So we had a conversation for about an hour. We were trying to come up with something worthy, something from my life that could relate to all this. And I told her that, toward the end of this conversation, I told her a bunch of incidents, a bunch of what seemingly disconnected incidents. And I wasn't sure why I was thinking of these things, but toward the end of the conversation, I told her, I was 6 when my mom gave me the talk. And just the other day, my son, who's also 6, looked at me and said, "Who's George Floyd?" And now I had to grapple with whether I wanted to give him the talk or not. And my editor said, "That's the book." Mm. And so, I knew where the book started and where the book would end, but I didn't really know why I brought up all the other incidents during the conversation. So I sat down and I made one chapter out of each incident. And as I was writing it and drawing it, I was exploring it, and I was reliving these memories, many of which I'd spent a lifetime trying to forget and successfully forget. And it all came back to me. I relived the whole thing, and I realized once I had everything laid out why I brought up all these incidents in that first conversation with my editor. And then it was just a matter of putting them in the right order. And there was the book. The talk is the same talk that we've had, just with different details over the past few hundred years. You have to you have to warn your children what's coming. You have to tell them, how to hopefully not provoke racists, the attention of racists, how not to, how to respond in ways that seem unnatural. Like when somebody stops you, when you're just going about your life, your tendency is to tell them, is to ignore them or tell them go to hell. But we've seen what that can lead to. That could lead to you becoming a hashtag. And it's difficult to have, because you have to have it at a time when they're still innocent, and when you look at your child, you don't want to rob them of that. Right. And you also always have hope that things are going to be better for them than they were for you. So you don't want to program them with your own experiences and your own viewpoints and your own fears. But at the same time, you don't want them to be caught off guard when it happens to them. So it's a difficult talk to have. And I think millions of people don't actually have it until it's too late. We see in the book, my mother was able to have the talk with me, but my father was not. And that's a major part of the book, me trying to figure out over the course of my lifetime why he did not have that talk with me.
Yeah, I was curious about that because your mother, who is a white woman, had this talk with you, and your father, who some would assume a black male, would have this talk with. Can you kind of explain that dynamic?
Well, I don't want to explain it too much because
Not too
that's
much, but
that's the whole
yeah,
the whole last act of the book.
just a little.
But he was my father. Whenever the topic of race came up, he would change the subject to something else, or he would tell me, just, it's not a big deal, just laugh it off. And it took me a long time to realize that, I mean, there's pros and cons to his approach. It's really useful to laugh it off. That's one way. I mean, to find the humor in it. That's one way you kind of take control of the situation, so that it doesn't affect you too negatively psychologically. And I think that's why I became a cartoonist. We spent a lot of time when I was a kid reading political satire and watching shows by Norman Lear, like All in the Family, that dealt with some really serious issues, but they always made you laugh, and they always found the humor in the absurdity of it. Because, I mean, when it comes down to it, racism is one of the most absurd things in the world. And you have to laugh or you'll go crazy.
I think you just hinted to an important point that that's a part of that survival apparatus, is to find humor in the absurdity, which is oftentimes the Black experience in America and beyond. But I want to pause there because we have another video that we want to segue to. If we're ready to cue that up, that's going to kind of take us deeper into that topic. And then I'm going to follow up with another question, and we'll get to our next author. In the meantime, audience, please feel free, chat with us, place your questions in the chat. We look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to join this conversation.
Prologue, Indelible. Stephen? East Los Angeles, 1981. Darrin, don't move. I don't. I can't. It's okay. Brandy, one of the older kids, kneels, outstretches her arms, and shows the Dobermans her palms. The dogs sniff them, and then they stop snarling. At her urging, all of the other kids do the same. They kneel, they outstretch their arms. They show the deadly beasts their palms. The dogs seem to accept the others' right to exist. But in all my 6 years, I've never been so afraid. I can't. I hide behind my big brother and wish the dogs would just go away. Two weeks later. The dogs keep their distance. Come on, Darrin. The next day, they chase me all the way home, nipping at me, toying with me, but for some reason never actually biting me. They follow me every day for weeks. When I'm free of them, I am never free of them. Tomorrow, they'll chase me. Some tomorrow, they'll catch me. 1 month later. Stephen and I wait on Valley Boulevard for the school bus. It's an hour before dawn. I hear paws rustling a bush's leaves in the shadows behind us. You're imagining it. I am not. Age before beauty. You hear it too. Stop being a scaredy cat. Hey. turn back to see, nothing. I take my seat, settle down, and gaze out the window. As the bus pulls away, a pair of eyes glare back at me. There it is! There it is! You see it too, I know you do. Stephen disappears into the bowels of the bus. So I take out my notebook and my crayons, and I draw the beast I know I saw. I know that if I could go back in time and kneel and outstretch my arms so the vicious dogs could sniff my palms, I would still be too afraid to do it. After school, the bus drops me off. I expect to be mauled. The Dobermans are nowhere to be seen, but I still feel their imprint. It's indelible now.
Powerful.
Thank you.
Did you want, because as I watch that, I'm thinking about, and you can feel free to add to this, that just the everyday, the quotidian, everyday violence that we experience, anti-Blackness that we experience. As we watch this clip, what's something you would like for us to kind of extract from that?
Well, a few things. I mean, my brother was older than I was, and he knew my father better, and he agreed with his concept of just ignoring it, and it won't hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and this actually happened with the dogs, and I thought it was the perfect metaphor for how my father and my brother approached this their whole lives. But eventually, it does get you at one point or another. There's this constant menacing presence, and you know it's there. And what's worse is the world gaslights you your whole life and tells you it's not, that you're imagining it.
Right.
And that, I think that's what this book is about. The book is saying no. It's there. This is really happening. And here's what you do about it. And here's how you don't let it beat you. And the first step in not letting it beat you is to acknowledge that it's real.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what the prologue's about, and that's what the book is about.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to join in into this conversation. I had another question I was going to follow up on that related to that. What about people who say, and we know we all live with this, we see it in the media, about this is divisive. It's this conversation, we of course books are being banned, but we don't need to have this conversation. This further divides us. Even as you lay bare your realities and what you're experiencing and what others are experiencing every day. How do you respond to that?
Well, it doesn't need to be divisive. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's education. What it can do is create empathy. It puts you in somebody else's shoes. You get to spend 350 something pages experiencing what I experienced and what millions of other Black people have experienced. I don't see how that can be divisive. All it does is create understanding.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a question here from Kwame Abdul-Habib from Lorne. Lorna, your daughter. Mr. Bell, hello, how are you? I like the book that you wrote. Son, okay, I got corrected. My dad bought it for me this weekend. I hope you drew everything. I want to learn to draw like that too. Do you have any suggestions?
Just do it. Even if all you can draw is stick figures, draw the best stick figure you can and do it every day. And by the time you have gray hair like this, you'll be drawing the way I do.
Wonderful encouragement there. Thank you so much for that question, Kwame. Anyone else before we move on to the next author as a part of this conversation? Okay. Again, thank you so much, Darrin. We're going to probably have some more questions that come about in the chat. We'll kind of continue this conversation. Thank you so much for those powerful videos, this wonderful and necessary dialogue. We also have another profound writer, graphic artist here with us today, Élodie Durand, who is giving us a wonderful book called Transitions, A Mother's Journey. Want to invite Élodie into this conversation to first of all, just give us a brief overview of the book and what inspired this story.
Oui, alors c'est ça. Donc, j'ai pas encore le livre en anglais parce qu'il n'est pas encore paru. Il va paraître dans quelques semaines. Et donc, c'est un livre qui est sorti en France en 2021. Et déjà, merci pour votre invitation et pour présenter Transition. Et c'est mon deuxième livre qui est traduit aux États-Unis. Et je suis vraiment très honorée de cette traduction parce que pour moi, être traduit en anglais, ça veut dire que c'est un livre qui voyage dans le monde entier. Donc, pour moi, c'est très fort. Donc, ce livre, il est à l'origine, en fait, je travaille en bande dessinée depuis plusieurs années, mais je ne fais pas que ça. Je fais aussi des romans jeunesse ou des albums jeunesse. Et en bande dessinée, je travaille soit toute seule, au scénario et au dessin, ou soit aussi avec des scénaristes. C'est très varié. Et les deux gros albums que j'ai fait toute seule, donc c'est celui-là, et puis Parenthesis qui a été traduit il n'y a pas longtemps. En général, quand je suis toute seule, je vais avoir un travail beaucoup plus personnel avec... j'ai remarqué que la plupart du temps, les thèmes, je travaillais toujours sur l'identité, la famille et l'introspection, un peu comme ça. Et donc, Transition, au départ, c'est l'histoire d'une rencontre, et une rencontre avec Anne Marbeau, qui m'a contactée une fois par mail. Et je reçois beaucoup de mails de gens qui veulent raconter leur histoire. Et je sais toujours que c'est très compliqué. Et du coup, je me suis dit, le mail de Anne, il était tellement particulier que je me suis dit, on va se rencontrer. Et on s'est rencontrés pendant plus d'1 an avant de décider que notre rencontre donnerait l'histoire d'un livre. Donc, Transition, c'est l'histoire d'une famille. C'est l'histoire aussi plus particulièrement d'une maman et de ses 3 enfants, et plus particulièrement de son aîné, qui un jour annonce à sa mère qu'il est un homme trans, et il a 19 ans. Et l'histoire débute avec cette annonce, et on va cheminer à travers ce livre dans les réflexions et dans les réactions de la maman. Il va y avoir de multiples voix, mais là, l'essentiel, c'était de suivre cette mère, et on va voir peu à peu ces changements de réflexion, et elle va, elle va se remettre en cause et regarder accompagner son enfant en faisant elle-même une sorte de transition et de changement de pensée. Voilà, je sais pas, je suis pas très... Ça, c'est le début du livre et c'est la première, c'est l'annonce. Donc, c'est Alex dans le livre et c'est Anne, la maman. Est-ce que je suis...
Yes, it's wonderful. I wanted to ask a bit about, this is a true story. And I wanted to know a bit about the research process for this book.
Oui, c'est une histoire vraie. Comme je disais, j'ai passé plus d'1 an d'abord juste voir Anne, voir sa famille. Je les ai interviewés, j'ai pris des notes. Et puis, parallèlement, c'est comme ça que je fonctionne. J'ai lu tout ce qui était possible sur le genre, sur les témoignages de transition qui existaient en France. Donc, ça a été des podcasts, des romans, des essais. J'ai compilé un peu tout ça, j'ai pris beaucoup de notes, des films aussi. Et puis, à chaque fois que j'avais des nouveautés, j'échangeais ça avec Anne. Et c'est tout ce chemin ensemble de lecture que j'ai changé avec Anne qui nous a permis de nous faire confiance pour pouvoir réaliser cet album. Et donc finalement, dans le livre, il y a peu de choses de tout ce que j'ai lu, mais il fallait, en fait, pour que je puisse comprendre Anne, il fallait que moi, j'aille encore plus loin et que je comprenne plus de choses que je connaisse plus de choses sur la question de la transidentité et sur la question du genre en général. Donc, on a travaillé pas vraiment ensemble. On a décidé au bout d'1 an et demi que je m'emparais du témoignage que j'avais recueilli et que moi, j'allais montrer à Anne toutes les étapes de travail à tous les moments. Donc, elle a vu la création d'un livre du début jusqu'à la fin et elle pouvait intervenir à chaque moment. Et on pouvait discuter de chaque scène et même de chaque dialogue. Et j'avais dans l'espoir de aussi pouvoir faire ça avec le garçon dans le livre. Mais j'ai attendu en fait que le travail soit très avancé pour pouvoir demander à Anne si son fils pouvait intervenir dans le livre. Et donc, on a fait ce qui a été fait. Et avec grand bonheur, il a accepté de participer dans le livre. Et il y a un moment donné, il écrit comme une réponse dans l'histoire à sa mère, un long mail. Et donc, lui aussi a pu participer c'est-à-dire qu'à un moment donné, quand tout le chemin de fer, tout le livre était fait en brouillon, il a pu le lire et puis participer à chaque scène et dire ses pensées. Et on a parfois changé des détails, plutôt des phrases au niveau du dessin et de la façon dont le scénario était mis en scène. Il n'y a pas eu vraiment d'intervention de la famille.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to speak to the design because I think even the images disrupt our binary logics. Can you speak to that?
J'ai pas compris. Ah, alors, au niveau du dessin des personnages, depuis toujours, je dessine des personnages qui sont pas spécialement genrés. Alors, peut-être on ressent ça dans le livre. Le dessin, il est assez simple. Et donc, je suis même pratiquement obligée de faire un effort pour pouvoir genrer mes personnages. Ça, c'est de tout temps, je ne sais pas trop pourquoi. Et à l'origine aussi, je fais beaucoup de dessins d'expression C'est ce que j'appelle plutôt ce genre de choses, des dessins d'émotions. Je fais ça depuis toute petite. Et quand je suis seule au scénario et au dessin, si je peux introduire des dessins d'émotions, même des mises en page un peu décalées, je m'en fais une grande joie. Et pour moi, c'est ça l'intérêt de pouvoir raconter une histoire en bande dessinée, c'est qu'on peut jouer avec beaucoup de choses. Et là, dans ce livre, oui, donc il y a du noir et blanc, il y a aussi des scènes de danse. Parfois, en fait, les mots sont plus là. Ça va être le dessin qui va raconter une émotion, une transition. C'est un peu subtil, un peu poétique parfois. Je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à la question, mais...
Absolutely, you have. Thank you.
Ouais.
I wanted to know, what did you learn that you didn't know in your process of research?
J'ai appris beaucoup de choses. Déjà, dès le départ, il m'a semblé évident que je devais raconter cette histoire à travers Anne, qui est proche de moi, qui est à peu près du même âge que moi, qui est une femme. Et pratiquement dès le tout début, j'ai senti que cette question des corps, elle nous appartenait tous. Et je me suis sentie engagée et intéressée par tout le questionnement du corps et de la transidentité. Et ça m'a amené à énormément de lectures féministes. En fait, il y avait une évidence que ce que vivait Anne, ça me concernait. Et j'avais aussi ce sentiment que ça concernait toute la population, puisqu'on est tous genrés à la naissance, et même avant même la naissance. Et, ça a été pratiquement immédiat. Après, c'est vrai que sur les questions de genre, sur le fait que ces questions-là, elles soient politiques, elles soient intimes, elles soient sociales, ça a fait que même quand le livre a été terminé, moi j'ai continué mes lectures. En fait, je ne pouvais plus m'arrêter de lire sur ces questions-là. Après, personnellement, je pense que moi, ça m'a beaucoup soulagée en fait, de pouvoir revivre. J'ai aussi re-questionné mon propre genre depuis ma naissance et qu'est-ce que ça avait incité et qu'est-ce que ça avait fait de moi comme adulte et comme femme. Et ça m'a beaucoup soulagée en fait de comprendre qu'il y avait beaucoup d'injonctions, qu'on n'était pas... qu'il y avait beaucoup de choses autour de nous sur lesquelles on n'avait pas la main mise, sur le comportement qu'on devait avoir. Ça m'a apporté un vrai repositionnement de travailler sur cette histoire. Et puis, aussi un autre pan, ça a apporté une vraie amitié avec toute la famille d'Anne. Donc, on continue toujours à se voir, à prendre des nouvelles des uns et des autres. Tout le monde a grandi, les enfants ont bien grandi. Et, on se fait voilà, le fait d'avoir vécu ça ensemble et puis de continuer à vivre l'événement de la traduction du livre dans différentes langues, tout ça, c'est très festif et cette amitié, c'est important.
Thank you. I have this other question. As trans people are increasingly vilified and subjected to hatred, what would you like for this book to do? You've kind of hinted towards that, but can you clearly state what you want this book to accomplish in light of what is happening in our society?
On avait l'espoir quand ce livre a été fait qu'il soit dépassé et et que il arrive après la bataille et qu'il n'y ait plus de problématiques de violence. Mais bon, je pense qu'il y avait une grosse naïveté. Et quand le livre il est paru en France, il y avait encore peu d'ouvrages qui étaient qui questionnaient la transidentité. En France, c'est très compliqué. En 2021, quand il est sorti, c'était même très compliqué d'en parler. Donc le sujet est hyper tabou et invisibilisé. Je pense que aux États-Unis, c'est un peu différent. Les communautés sont probablement plus importantes, peut-être plus visibles. Et évidemment, moi, je trouve ça terrifiant, ce qui se passe dans le monde entier, et qu'on ne laisse pas les corps tranquilles. Il y a de la place pour tout le monde et pour les différences et les similitudes. Donc, moi, j'ai vu par les lecteurs et les retours sur l'album que c'était un livre qui était aidant et qui permettait justement d'introduire un chemin vers peut-être de la compréhension, de se mettre à la place aussi des personnes qui connaissent, qui n'ont jamais entendu, qui ne se sont jamais questionnées sur le genre. Donc, peut-être que ce livre, c'est un chemin pour se questionner, changer de lunettes de genre et voir un peu différemment. Peut-être en tout cas, en France et les retours que j'ai eus, c'est vrai que c'est ce qu'on m'a dit, que le livre était très aidant et soulageait beaucoup aussi les familles qui vivaient une transition avec un de leurs enfants.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask about the receptivity of the book in France, and so I'm glad to know that and both of these books are calling us to look within ourselves, to consider other pathways as we move forward in our critique of gender, sexuality, identity. So thank you for that. Audience members, you're invited into this conversation. I have a couple of more questions, but you can add yours. I wanted to go back to Darrin because I was looking at the last chapters 16 and 17, where we did it, and the other, if I had a son, where you in 16 kind of critique these notions of a post-racial society, and you're illustrating the prevailing violence or racial violence towards Black boys. And as I read those, as I looked at those illustrations, I began to look at it through the lens of, we thought we were at a place where we were okay. However, we were consistently reminded that the violence is still present. We still have much to work through, despite this watershed moment in American history where we have the first Black man elected as president. But still, we're dealing with the undercurrents of that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, you know, we thought there had been a lot of progress, but what happened was there was a lot of shame over the past several decades. White supremacists, white nationalists began to feel ashamed of their views, and they knew that they were not helpful to their careers or their lives or their friendships, and so they suppressed them, and we were all lulled into a false sense that those sentiments had gone away, but they hadn't. And all it took was one president who who would proudly say the things that other people would keep inside. That's all it took to embolden these people to start talking the way they used to talk, to start trying to pass laws that they only dreamt of passing in the past, to try to silence the voices that had finally been heard. to try to roll back progress. And we're in the middle of that right now. We're in the middle of that backlash. It's the same energy as the backlash to Reconstruction, the same energy as the backlash to the Civil Rights Movement, complete with assassinations. We've had, we haven't had assassinations of famous people lately, but we've had plenty of assassinations of ethnic minorities, of Jews, of trans people, especially of Black people. And I mean, the only reason we don't talk about that is because we don't know their names. They were people just living their lives. So I mean, this is a perilous situation, and what we need is not to just shut down the conversation and not talk about it. What we need is for all these books that are being banned to be read by the people who are trying to ban them. If only we could make it so that if you want something to be banned, you have to pass a test to prove that you actually read it. I bet none of these books would be on ban lists, because these books, as I said, they put you in other people's shoes, and it creates empathy and understanding. And once you've read them, it's hard to hold on to your preconceived notions and your prejudices. And I think that's why so many people don't want other people to read these books, because they're comfortable with these prejudices, because these prejudices, they've held on to them their entire lives, and they're comfortable. They're a comfortable old pair of shoes, and they don't want to give them up.
Correct.
And it's hard to hold on to your prejudice when everybody around you is becoming enlightened. So they're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have to push back against that by creating works like these. And if they're not seen today, they'll be rediscovered by future generations. The books we create today, nobody can undo these books, no matter how hard they try. Eventually, they'll be read.
Thank you. That's very profound, and speaks to the necessity of the artist, of the writer, at all times, but particularly in these moments where we think we're okay and then things erupt. We have to have these prophetic voices that are calling us to higher levels of consciousness, as you all are doing in both of these texts in a very unique format, creating this archive, if you will, of experiences of consciousness that we need not only for today but in the future. And we have a comment here from Margot Cameron. I like how you both have given us the tools to increase our understanding. Those who we see as other, have the discussion, build empathy, and learn how we are the same. Allison McKeever, graphic novels tend to be some of the first in the industry to show a marginalized person's experience. What is it about the form and perhaps graphic novel authors that make them forerunners for telling these important stories? And both of you can answer that if you'd like.
Well, graphic novels are powerful. I mean, a lot of kids, myself included, learned to read so that we could read graphic novels and comic books. I think it's because they activate both. One reason is because they activate both halves of your brain, the part that gravitates toward words, the part that gravitates toward images. It activates your entire brain. And when the thing that you're reading is passionate, you can't help but feel it if you're seeing it and reading it at the same time. And they say a picture can tell 1,000 words. So when you combine pictures with the text, you're getting something as big as War and Peace in the size of a comic book.
Élodie, would you like to respond?
Ah oui, c'est une question qui est difficile. Je pense que quand j'ai écrit toute seule, à chaque fois, j'ai parlé de sujets tabous, mais peut-être parce que je suis curieuse et puis que j'ai envie de comprendre. Souvent, j'ai envie de comprendre, apprendre et écrire ces livres. Moi, ça me permet aussi de cheminer, d'apprendre un tas de choses. J'ai aussi une sensibilité, une émotion particulière et qui est presque vitale à transmettre en dessin. Donc, je vais naturellement comme ça, plutôt vers des questionnements peut-être même un peu philosophiques et parfois un peu compliqués, mais c'est très riche et très riche à partager et très riche pour moi pour avancer, pour grandir.
Thank you. I was going to ask, as writers, as creators, we often build on the work of others. The works of others influence what we produce. As it relates to these particular graphic novels that you've written, who influenced this work? Whose work have you drawn on as a source of inspiration for these graphic novels you've written? That's for both of you.
Oui.
Well,
Alors,
go ahead.
oui, il y a beaucoup de gens qui m'influencent parce que je suis influencée par les romanciers que je lis, par le cinéma, par de la bande dessinée. Alors, s'il fallait parler que de bande dessinée, aussi par les podcasts radio depuis quelques années maintenant. Tout ça, ça me nourrit. Et par les tableaux aussi. Et s'il fallait choisir quelques personnes en bande dessinée, il y a Will Eisner, quand j'étais étudiante, qui était peut-être une des révélations. Oui, Will Eisner. Eisner. C'est bon. Et qui était peut-être au niveau de la narration, qui est complètement fantastique, le dessin, tout ça, c'était un de mes premiers coups de cœur. Et puis après, en France, dans les années 90, il y a eu une maison d'édition qui s'appelait l'Association, avec les premiers romans graphiques, avec des histoires intimes. Il y avait Marjane Satrapi, il y avait David B. Donc en fait, c'est tous les albums de cette maison d'édition, ça faisait partie des choses où je me suis dit, bah, c'était possible. C'était l'association. Non, l'association. Ouais. Donc en France, il y a eu en France, il y a eu un vrai tournant à un moment donné. Et il y avait Pilule bleue aussi de Frédéric Peters. C'est grâce à ces livres-là que je me suis dit que oui, je pouvais aussi avoir des histoires à raconter en bande dessinée. Et le meilleur médium, c'était la bande dessinée pour ces histoires.
Thank you. And for me, it was Mouse. That was a major influence. I read that in junior high, and on the other half of my family, we lost a whole branch of my family in the Holocaust, and they didn't talk about it too much, but when I read Mouse, I couldn't help but feel what those family members who I never got to meet, what happened to them, what they had to go through. And it provoked so many questions. And it opened so much dialogue with my family. And I was able to learn so much at such a young age. And I think that's what a great graphic novel does. But I was also influenced by the works of Alan Moore and especially Neil Neil Gaiman, and and satirical comic strips like Bloom County. And but for me, one of my major influences, as I mentioned, was were the TV shows of Norman Lear. So I think you could tell when you read the talk, it's kind of drawn in a cinematic way, almost like you're watching a TV show or a movie. And I think that's how I think, and it was in large part because of Norman Lear.
We have a few more minutes here. Audience, you're welcome to join in to this conversation. The book, The Talk, by Darrin Bell, as well as Transitions by Élodie Durand, two profound authors who are raising our consciousness, who are providing pathways of understanding. We have a lot of festival attendees in Central Arkansas area and beyond, all demographics, who are looking for answers, who are looking for inspiration. In terms of your books, what's the, and we can kind of leave it there, close with this. How do you want to inspire them, these particular people who are searching for the answers that you are providing in these texts and ways that you're expanding our imaginations? Why should they read this book? What will be the main takeaway? You can't speak for everyone, of course, but what do you want them to take away?
Well, for me, there are a few different audiences for the book. There are the people who've experienced things like this and things that are far worse than what happened in my life. I want them to take away from the book that they're seen, that they're heard, that they're not crazy. And no matter how much people try to gaslight you and tell you it's all in your head, or you're being unfair for pointing out other people's racist comments and actions, that's not true. And for people who don't, for white people, especially people who harbor prejudice, I want them to be able to take from this. I want them to read it. Hopefully they'll read it. They need to read it. And I want them to see the results of their actions from the point of view of the recipient of their actions. And maybe they'll develop some introspection and think, do I do that to people in my life? Maybe I should stop. I don't need to do that. This person is a lot more like me than I think they are. They're not some mysterious threat lurking out there who I need to control, who I need to call 911 on. I should just let them live their lives. And they'll and hopefully they could develop some understanding, and in that way they'll grow.
Élodie?
Moi, je dirais que Transition, c'est un livre qui peut se lire à partir de 16 ans jusqu'à 100 ans et plus, que c'est vraiment ouvert et facile à lire pour tous. Il n'y a pas de... Ça peut être pour des personnes qui vivent la transidentité, pour des familles, et pour aussi des personnes qui s'intéressent aux questions de genre, mais ça va au-delà de ça parce que c'est avec l'histoire de transition, il y a aussi un voyage culturel, sociétal, historique, et c'est bien plus large que juste la question de la transidentité. C'est un ensemble, et moi je trouve que ça peut concerner tout le monde. Et il y a des très belles images.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for these brilliant responses. Anyone else care to join this conversation? I don't want to dominate it. You're more than welcome to ask a question of our authors. We have about 4 minutes. If not, then I'll ask about this. I know this was, many of your works was very, very challenging to write. What was one thing that gave you joy out of writing these graphic novels? Darrin, you can go first.
Okay, well, for me, what gave me joy was, there were so many incidents in the book where I felt a sense of shame at the time as a child. For instance, the first incident where I run into a police officer. I was just playing with my water gun at the age of 6, and a police officer shouted, "Drop the weapon," at me, and started barking orders, and I just froze and closed my eyes and wished he would go away. And eventually he did. And I felt such a profound sense of shame that I didn't tell anybody about it for years. I thought I should have been able to do something.
Mm-hmm.
When you're 6, you don't really see yourself as being as small as you are. And I thought I should have been able to at least talk some sense into the police officer, but I didn't. And there are a bunch of incidents like that in the book. When I was reliving it as I was creating the book and experiencing this all again, I was able to do it from the perspective of a grown-up who has children of his own. And I realized I was not to blame for most of this. I didn't bring it on myself like they told me I did at the time. And it was such a sense of catharsis. I was able to let go of a lot of shame that I had held and bottled up for 30 something years. So that on a personal note, that was the best part of creating the talk for me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Élodie?
Oui, alors moi j'ai toujours beaucoup de joie quand je fais un chemin de fer, quand je construis le brouillon de l'histoire complète. Et puis de la joie quand le livre est terminé et qu'il sort. Là, pour ce livre-là, il y avait beaucoup d'enjeux. Aussi d'être juste dans les propos, dans ce que j'avais choisi de dire. Et j'avais beaucoup de craintes. Et la plus grande des joies, c'est quand le livre est sorti et qu'il y a eu les premières critiques et que toute la communauté LGBTQI+ s'est emparée du livre et l'a validé. Ça a été une grande joie et un grand soulagement. Ça voulait dire aussi que j'avais réussi à trouver les justes milieux et c'était une grande joie et pour moi et aussi pour Anne Marbeau, qui est l'héroïne du livre.
Thank you. We're down to 1 minute. So thank you so much to these wonderful authors for the gifts that you have shared with us. Darrin, Élodie, we appreciate your work. The audience who joined us today, thank you so much for joining Six Bridges Festival. Thank you so much, Stephen, for translating for us. The books, please buy them. You can purchase them 2 ways, as is listed in the chat. They're available for purchase at Book Central, located inside Robinson Theater, beginning Thursday at noon through the end of the festival. Books are also currently available at Pyramid Arts, Art Books, and Custom Framing. And at Wordsworth, you can check out the link online to pyramid1988.com. Again, get the book. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to the organizers. And we hope you all have a wonderful week.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci.